Hi, it's Penny here, and this is a video that I'm going to be posting on Mother's Day. Now, of course, mostly I am a fan of Mother's Day, but one thing I hate about it is just kind of this underlying propaganda, is what I think I'm calling it. The idea that every mother is amazing and perfect and kind of the same, like all those gift guides that are just saying, give your mother these things, she'll love them, regardless of what kind of person she is. Yeah, I kind of hate it. And not every mother is perfect. And I think it's not helpful to pretend that they are or expect people to live up to that expectation. But anyway, what I thought I would do today is talk about a bunch of different mothers that I've encountered in different fantasy books and the different kinds of mothers that they represent. So of course, in fantasy books, especially ones targeted at younger adults, the default is really for the mother, and in fact both the parents usually, to be dead, because it's kind of lazy writing, but it really just allows these young characters, like gives them an excuse to go on these grand adventures with no parental guidance. But in real life, of course, there are a lot of people who really struggle on Mother's Day because of this exact situation. Anyway, some examples that I thought of, there's heaps, but I will mention Howl's Moving Castle. This one in particular because the parent's death is really used as like the kind of the motivating factor, or one of the factors into why Sophie ends up going on her grand adventure, going off to seek her fortune and eventually running into the wizard Howl and everything that goes on there. And it's an interesting example because mostly Sophie's story is not, other than the story being triggered by that, mostly it doesn't play any further part in her story, which is the case for some people, or it can be completely different. Another example would be the Cursed Princess Club. This is a graphic, initially a webcomic type series, but now it's being published in books. We're following these three princesses who are now being betrothed to these three princes, and unfortunately the third prince doesn't react very well when he discovers that the third princess is not as stereotypically beautiful as the others. Also, throughout the story, because we meet this Cursed Princess Club, there is a big mystery around whether Gwendolyn herself, the third princess, is actually cursed, and a lot of questions about their dead mother, which I really love the way that the story comes together in a wholesome way, and I think the connection the princesses end up having with their mother is really wholesome as well. But there are also plenty of books out there where the mothers are there for their families. One that I particularly loved, maybe because the mother's name is Penelope, but also for other reasons, is the Hidden Legacy series by Ilona Andrews. So currently this is a 2-trilogy series. Firstly, we follow the older sister as she's kind of taking over her family's private investigation business and trying to make it successful to sort out their financial situation. In this world where people have different genetic magical abilities, and because of that certain families have a lot of political power as well as magical power, and our main characters kind of end up getting very involved in the politics of this world. But one thing I really love is the way that Ilona Andrews writes family. It's not a surprise because they are a husband and wife writing duo with children of their own, and I do suspect that their books give you some insight into their own parenting techniques. But one thing I like about Penelope is that she trusts her children to take on what they can and like use their own capabilities to deal with the situations, and even though she's always there to support them, she also lets them do their thing. There are reasons why she's not running the private investigation firm, but also what I like about her is she is like an ex-army vet, I think, and she's really into like guns and tanks and runs the security for their family operations, while also just being like a really supportive mother. And I think as well the next thing I wanted to talk about is like stepmothers or substitute mothers, and in some ways that's Penelope as well, because her sister is not the best, and so she has essentially adopted her sister's children, so the cousins of her children, and they live with the family as well and are pretty much just treated as part of the family. And I just in general really love the way that that family is written. Another example of stepmothers that I really like is in Assassin's Apprentice. Actually, I'm not sure you get her in this book. I can't remember. You might not actually get her until the second book of the trilogy. But Fitz is basically the bastard son of the king in waiting, and because when he is brought to the kingdom and basically dumped from the mother's family. And this king in waiting is disgraced because of the fact that he has had this illegitimate child. And him and his wife at the time basically move away into the country, and Fitz never really gets to meet them for a long time. But in the second book, I think it's the second book, the wife of his father does meet him, and her name is Patience, because a lot of characters in this world are named after different virtues that they're supposed to have. So Patience is such a strange woman. She does really like gardening, which I guess is a stereotypical motherly thing, but she's also like really absent-minded and doesn't always view things in the way that other people do. And at first, Fitz really struggles to have a connection with her, and it's obvious that she really wants to have a connection with him, even though she also doesn't really know how to go about it. But eventually, I really like where their relationship goes. So keep those stepmothers and substitute mothers in mind on Mother's Day. Then another thing that often gets forgotten on Mother's Day is that mothers have lives before they have children. So I think the best example of that I have is the 5th season. It's a little bit hard to talk about why because of spoilers. But one of the characters that we are following does eventually become a mother, and we see a quite traumatic impact of her previous life on that motherhood experience. I'm actually going to talk about this book later with some other things I want to talk about as well. And at that point, maybe I'll give this a trigger warning. But even though this book can be really traumatic at times, and it is written in a strange way where there's 3 different perspectives, and one of those perspectives is written in second person, where, saying you all the time as it describes what one of the characters is doing. So I know sometimes people struggle with that writing style, but I actually love what this book has to say about motherhood, and the series does continue to have a focus on that, as well as all this crazy apocalyptic climate change and oppression stuff that's going on. Then another thing that I think Mother's Day often overlooks is that mothers can still have a life outside of being mothers. I know that motherhood can be incredibly draining, and so a lot of mothers don't feel like they do have that option, but wouldn't it be nice if all of them did? I know at least some of them definitely managed to manage it, and one of them that does is Kate Daniels from the Kate Daniels series. So in this, we follow this mercenary. It's kind of like a paranormal romance series, but more focused on the magical story. Kate Daniels is this mercenary in a world where magic is coming back in waves, so sometimes magic works and other times technology works. And she also ends up getting involved a lot with the shapeshifters in this world. It also has like a lot of really different and creative looks at a lot of different paranormal creatures, and it pulls in lots of mythology from all over the world, which I really love. But later on in the series, Kate and her love interest do end up having a child. And actually as well, there is a young woman or a young girl that Kate Daniels kind of adopts as well. And so we get to see Kate Daniels always trying to balance this mercenary lifestyle that she's having in this apocalyptic world and all these different magical murder mysteries that she's trying to solve, dealing with that at the same time as trying to deal with her children, which have their own magical things to deal with as well. So this is a series also written by Alona Andrews that I mentioned before with the Hidden Legacy series. And once again, I think you can see, or I actually think Alona Andrews, especially there's a spin-off series from this, Kate Daniels' The Wilmington Years, where Kate and her love interest are quite a bit older and their child is maybe 10-ish. And in that series especially, I think they're really getting into a lot of how they see or how they approach parenthood, which I found really interesting. Okay, then I did also mention that motherhood isn't always easy, and I also have a couple of books where mothers are struggling. Both of these are technically horror, but horror fantasy crossovers, which is probably the best kind of books where you're going to find mothers having a really hard time. One that I really love is Someone Like Me. In this, we follow several different characters, but one of them, and I think she's the one on the cover, is this mother, and when she is in this domestic abuse type situation, she feels like someone else takes over her body and fights back. And where the story goes with that is very strange, and it's a particular kind of story element that I really love. But following this mother as she still tries to be a good mother as well as deal with this domestic abuse and also this weird, horrific fantastical, maybe even science fiction, actually, depending on how you look at it. Like, while she deals with that, it's sometimes hard to read, but also an important reminder that motherhood is not always great. Another one is the Lock and Key series by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. So this is a longer graphic novel series. I think there's 6 volumes, and we're following the Locke family, who, after some very traumatic events, move back to the father's family home, where there are all these magical keys hidden through the house that only the children are able to understand the magic of. So like in this world, only children can see magic, and the mother is generally pretty confused about what she's seen when they use magic, or when they use the magic keys around her. But also the mother is really struggling with the traumatic event that sets this book series off. And she's often dealing with that through alcoholism, and just, she's really struggling. But she is always there for her children as much as she can be. Although that doesn't mean her and her children don't have a lot of conflict as well, when they don't always agree with their mother's decisions. Then a little bit of a sidestep for this video. There are some women that don't want to be mothers. I couldn't find any examples of these in fantasy books, but I do have some sci-fi, and sci-fi is just a different way of looking at fantasy in some ways. The Calculating Stars. So this is an alternating history where a meteor hits the Earth and kind of escalates or accelerates the space program, because humanity is not going to be able to live on Earth much longer. And we're following primarily one woman, but also some others that are trying to be involved in the space program because they have a lot of skills that would be really useful. But of course, this is set back in the 50s, where things are much more sexist. And our main character, Alma, and her husband really are focused on their career and this important mission of saving the Earth, and so they choose not to have children. I don't actually fully remember, but The Relentless Moon is the 3rd book in the same series, and I'm pretty sure that there is a mention in here that the main character and her husband would have liked to have children. However, she has some kind of health issues that mean it's not really possible. So do keep in mind on Mother's Day that some people choose not to be a mother and are never interested, and will be quite frustrated if you assume that they are. And also, other people who don't have children would really love to, but can't, which is often one that's even harder. So just try not to make too many assumptions is what I would say. Another one that you might want to have some sensitivity around is mothers who don't have children. So this is where we're bringing back the 5th season. I said before there are 3 perspectives in this book. One of them's a young girl, but another one that I haven't talked about yet is this old woman who at the beginning of this book comes home, and it turns out her husband has discovered that she has these earth powers. So there's certain people in this world who can control the earth and like create earthquakes and things like that. This husband has discovered that this woman and her child have these earth powers, and he has murdered their child. So that's the trigger warnings for this book. Do be careful. It's definitely written in a way that will have a massive emotional impact, and it's worth keeping in mind that some people have gone through this kind of thing. Maybe not that awful, although some have. Anyway, let's be sensitive to different people's situations. But if you want a traumatic book, this is it. Lastly, I'm sure there's lots of different situations I haven't talked about, but lastly, I did want to say, not all mothers are good mothers. There are plenty of really bad mothers out there, and you shouldn't have to celebrate them on Mother's Day. I saw a statistic, I'm pretty sure it's for America, that 1/4 of adults are estranged from their parents. And maybe in some of those cases, it will be worth trying to make amends. But in many of them, it's probably not. And maybe that's sad, but maybe that's also just the way it is. Or maybe it's both. Anyway, the example that I thought of for this one is Roses and Rot by Kat Howard, mainly because I just really love this book. We're primarily following these 2 sisters who are very creative, and they both decide to go to this school for creatives, where there also turns out to be a bit of a competition that perhaps involves the Fae. But all of the women that we meet at the school are not only creative, but really struggling. And these sisters are struggling because their mother was in fact incredibly abusive, both emotionally and physically. And when the older sister managed to get away, because she left as soon as she could. The younger sister feels very betrayed by having been left behind. And even though they really love each other, their relationship is very strained because of that, and that has a bigger impact on the plot as well. Anyway, that is my list of a bunch of different mothers in fantasy and maybe some sci-fi and horror books. Let me know who your favorite mothers are from different fantasy books, both good mothers and bad mothers. I did find when I was trying to look for examples for this video, a lot of books don't even mention the mothers of the characters. And I think that's because I'm reading a lot of fantasy books with adult characters. And as I said, a lot of adults just aren't that close with their parents. Anyway, let's chat down below. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.